Are you considering buying a cabin in the Smoky Mountain area? Stay tuned and I'll give you the top inspection items that you should be considering before making that purchase and why you should be hiring us. Before I show you 10 things that could occur during a cabin inspection, first let me say this. There are thousands of great cabins throughout the Smoky Mountain area. And it doesn't mean that your cabin is going to have every issue that we're going to talk about today. It may not have any of them, but if you have at least one of these, then it could be more than what you'd originally budgeted when you purchased the property. So let's jump into it. First, let's talk about chimney issues. The chimneys, of course, are high up. A lot of the cabins are built on slopes, and they're going to be at an angle to where you're not going to be able to see the top of the chimney. At the top of the chimney, it's usually concrete. Concrete can crack. Cracks means that it can hold water, and water can freeze and expand and cause further damage. You can see in our photo here how the cracks are increasing in size, and those are only going to get worse unless the person's brought in to fix it. Another example. Sometimes chimneys are decorative only. They're non-vented gas logs, and the chimney is just a wood structure, a wood box with stucco. Regardless, in an area that you couldn't see from the ground, you can see that damage is present and water can find its way in. Let's talk about roof coverings and flashings. You're not going to see most of the roofs on the cabins that you review in the Smoky Mountains. Again, it's based on the slope. The roofs are high up and the mountains are very steep. So I want to show you here that you're not going to climb up on a roof of this pitch and look out over the ridge vent to see what's going on. Most of the cabins in the Smokies are either metal coverings or some type of asphalt shingle. And you can see here with shingles, you're going to have granular wear over time just because of where the cabins are located under a thick canopy and the winter weather. Sometimes the shingles can degrade faster and create granular loss at a rate faster than what would normally be found in the city. There can be damage from trees, falling objects that you're not going to see from the ground, but could cause major problems as far as moisture intrusion and water damage. Being the slopes of the Smokies, we have a lot of high wind. High wind means that the shingles can be taken off, and sometimes you'll see that people will go back and then just do patch jobs, which is not very attractive. And then at the top, you can see here where the wind has sheared part of the shingles off. Another problem is the canopy cover, because after all, who wants a cabin sitting out in the middle of a desert? No one. That's part of it, being in the mountains with the tree coverings around you. Fortunately, the shaded roofs will hold moisture longer, which increases the rate at which fungal growth will occur and moss growth. You can see from these examples, if you were to walk around, the mountain drops off here, and you would never see this moss growing on the back side of this roof at this cabin. Moss has roots. Roots embed into the shingles, and the shingle life is quickly, drastically reduced because of this growth. And you can see there's all types of different fungal growth, but it's occurring in the shaded areas of the shingles. Flashings that are damaged. This flashing has been damaged. It's older. It's torn at the top. It's disconnected, and someone has tried to caulk it. But again, things that you may not see from the ground level. Hopefully there's flashing present. Sometimes the flashing can't be seen, or we don't know if it's there or not, and you'll see a heavy bead of caulk between the shingle and the chimney interface. Caulk is an ongoing maintenance issue. It expands, contracts with our different seasons, so eventually it's going to crack, and unless you're checking it periodically, you're not going to know it until you see the water coming down through the ceiling. Let's talk about gutters and downspouts. Most of the cabins that you're going to see in our area do not have gutters and downspouts. What does that mean? All of the water that's collected from this roof is going to one place, and that's down the side to the dirt where the foundation is on the slope. So we have high slopes, a building sitting on that slope, and a constant supply of water eroding the soil around that foundation. So this is an issue. it's a catch-22. Do you have gutters or do you not have gutters? The reason people don't have gutters and downspouts is because of the maintenance issues, and we'll get into those in a moment. So when you pull up to a cabin in areas that you can see and you see there's no gutters or downspouts, pay particular attention to the foundation, because what happens is all the water collected from the roof is either going to be collected by the deck, which causes more log rot. These areas are constantly exposed to splatter, and it's rotting your logs. Again, we talked about the high slope of the mountain area and what water makes it to the ground. You can see there's erosion around the bottom of the foundation, and this is a fairly significant slope. So the last thing we want is water eroding away the areas that's supporting our home. So with the lack of gutters on a high slope, water falls near the foundation and causes erosion. Now, with that being said, if you're lucky enough to have gutters, you fall into another whole area of maintenance issues. The gutters are quickly going to fill with leaves and debris. After all, we're in the mountains. So the gutters are going to become clogged, and they're going to act like as though there's no gutters there. So if you do have gutters and downspouts, make sure you have preventative ways to keep debris out of the gutters, and make sure that you're inspecting them often to make sure that everything is clean, open, and flowing. Check your downspouts. Again, I can't preach enough on the slopes and introducing water into those areas. So you can erode the soil away from your deck post. You can see here, this is actually part of the foundation, and the water is dumping right onto the soil, washing the soil away from our footer. Let's talk vegetation. Again, who wants a cabin in the desert? We all want that cabin out in the forest. But those limbs can grow out and cause damage to your roof. Heavy winds moving back and forth can cause shingle loss. Heavy snow loads onto the limbs can cause further damage to your roof. So it's very important that you keep the vegetation trimmed back. And if you see a cabin with a lot of vegetation hanging over it, then you might as well suspect that there's more than likely some type of potential roof damage up there. A lot of times the electrical wires coming into the overhead service or below ground service will come through the tree canopy. Again, the heavy snow loads of our mountains pulls the limbs down. The weight of the snow and the limbs on the electrical wires will in turn pull the service entrance conductor. You see by this red line, this was the original angle or degree at which the service entrance mast should be located. But with the winters from past, the lines have tightened because of the snow load on them, on the limbs, and everything is pulled to the left. And that is a fire waiting to happen. Not to mention that if that breaks, that could short circuit everything in the log cabin. This again is in an area to where you probably wouldn't see as you do your general walkthrough. So while we're on electrical, let's talk a little bit about that. A lot of times in the breaker box, you'll see knockout plates missing. If you're renting this cabin as extra income and someone's child sticks a fork or a screwdriver into the panel box, I don't know why they'd be doing that on vacation, but stranger things have happened. They're going to become energized in part of the circuit, and you're probably not going to own the cabin for much longer. Also, inside the breaker box, it's very common to have double taps. On most breakers, they are designed for one single wire to be on that circuit. But sometimes when people run out of space, they will piggyback or double tap extra wires into the single breaker. And here you can even see there's two different size wiring, so one of them is wrong for the amperage of the breaker. Also in the homes, you may have ground faults that are present but not functioning, or you may have outlets that are not ground fault protected and should be. Anything 6 feet of a water source, that means kitchens, bathrooms, exterior outlets, and garages, which 9 times out of 10, you're not going to have a garage in a cabin in the Smoky Mountains. But there are designated areas that require GFCI outlets, and that's part of the testing that we do. Also, exposed wiring. Again, if someone's child gets bored while they're on vacation and they decide to go looking in areas that they shouldn't, and they find these and they touch them and become energized, that's just going to cause a lot of issues for you as the cabin owner. Cloudy windows. These log homes, there's a great weight on these log structures. They're kiln dried, which reduces some of the weight, and then the logs are brought in and they're stacked. And over time, as settling occurs, or if you just have a roof that's depositing all the water next to the foundation and causing soil erosion, if there's any movement, that can create pressure on the windows. The windows come usually with an argon gas pack between the two double panes. And when the seal gets ruptured, that argon gas escapes. And when the atmospheric air comes in, there's a white precipitate salt that forms. And once that window's cloudy, there's no fixing it. You can't clean between the two panes, and your only option is to fix it. Some windows may look fine, and the cloudiness is just beginning to form, as you can see at the bottom. So again, that's another thing we do as the inspector, is we look at things that you may not consider. Most people will look at these homes and think about vacation, how they're going to spend their Christmas here, and you should. That's the allure of the Pigeon Forge, Gatlinburg, Sevierville area. People come here with more things on their mind than what's wrong with my house, but that's my job. That's what I do. Let's talk about siding damage. It's not uncommon to have cracks in your log structures, whether exterior or interior. A lot of the butt ends on the logs at the connections in the corners, there's a lot of flat areas. And flat areas mean one thing: it's a place for water to gather. So if the log structure is not properly sealed, again, we said it's not uncommon to have cracks in your logs, gathering water on the cracks. You can see here's a great example of a cross section of the log, and you can see the annular rings here, and cracks do form. But if this is not properly sealed, and we're talking about one single crack on an entire log structure, it's a big deal to get these sealed up. But water gets in and creates wood rot. Another thing you should be looking for as you consider purchasing a cabin. Also, let's talk about the various insects in the mountains. The carpenter bees, they can come in and do great damage. You can see here the sawdust on this roof as they bored up through the trim boards on the side of this house. They can cause great damage to your beautiful log home, and they bore into the wood. They lay their eggs. The eggs hatch, larvae are produced. Woodpeckers have figured out this is a great food source, so the woodpeckers can come in and they'll bore the holes out even bigger just to extract the larvae from the carpenter bees that's inside the wood. And it causes great damage. This is a beautiful log structure, but you have this huge blemish on the side. Your deck, you can see again how it's been bored out. Also, there's insects that come from the ground. The macroinvertebrates, the termites, subterranean termites. Inside the crawl space, these are mud tubes, or one-time remnants of mud tubes, and the termites build these they have a damp little highway inside these tunnels that they can travel up the block until they bore back into the wood. Also, it lets the rest of the colony know where the termites are, and it's just a highway for the termites to travel from the ground up the foundation block and into your log structure. And believe me, I have seen plenty of damage. Disclaimer, I'm not an exterminator, but I can see wood damage, and I've seen enough to know what a termite looks like to put those two together. But I'm a licensed home inspector, but I'm not a licensed exterminator. So let's look at some of the damage that can occur inside the logs. When you purchase the structure, the logs may look wonderful, but over time, if there's termites present, they will work their way to the surface. And now you have all this damage to the interior of the log. Some of these may be 10 to 12 inches in diameter. So how far back does the damage go? How damaged are my walls now due to termites and other wood destroying insects? Even more, how much is it going to cost to fix? Will I have to have every bit of this hollowed out and a wood polymer put in, some type of wood filler? Will I have to have the entire log cut out and a section of a log put in? Once I do that, the stain's not going to match, so then you run into issues of having to restain the entire cabin. Speaking of stain, a lot of times the wood, whether in contact with the shingles or the ground, the shingles are going to stay damp in certain areas. So when the wood is touching the shingles, as we see here, it allows the moisture to wick up through the wood. This will not only cause stain damage, and you can see the rate almost like a chromatograph, how far up the wood that the moisture has traveled, but it also promotes wood rot, not only here, but on the inside as well. Again, just another picture, and as we were talking about flashing earlier, whether flashing's present or not, can't tell, but you can see here that this has been heavily caulked, which is a no-no, because this steep roof on the side of a steep mountain, that's just not an area you're going to think about when you come into town to spend time at your cabin. But again, we do. This is what we do for a living. So you can see the wood damage here, the stain damage. Once you start to stain all of this, again, nothing's going to match. So you're going to have to do the entire structure. And it's not going to be cheap to get in here and to restain this entire structure. You can't just walk around it with a roller and some stain and extend a pole. Some of these are 60 to 80 feet off the ground, and you're going to need ladders, scaffolding, and other means to get up there to comfortably and safely work. Here's an example of some wood that's in contact with the ground. Typically, there should be 4 to 6 inch clearance, but when the wood is in contact with the soil, you can bet that water wicking will occur and the wood will be damaged. Let's talk about decks. And again, if there was a top 10, this would probably be closer to number 1, and you should pay particular attention to these things. First, a lot of these decks are high off the ground. A lot of times, these decks aren't built under any particular standard. Here you see that there's no lag bolts connecting the deck to the home. There's no flashing, and these decks are really, really high. What does that mean? Typically, a deck under the wood siding or the log siding, there should be flashing present. That flashing will come out and overlap the trim boards on the deck and allow the water to drip away from the deck. When that's not present, this piece of flashing here, a lot of times they will caulk between the deck and the log wall interface. When that caulking deteriorates, moisture gets in behind the deck at the connections and causes wood rot. So now what's holding up your deck if the nails or lag bolts are anchored or affixed into soft rotting wood? Here's another example of deck ledger flashing, but the point of the matter is the flashing should come from behind the siding over the deck trim boards and allow the water to drip away down between the deck flooring and the deck trim boards. And when that doesn't occur, you can have some big issues. What's the first thing everybody wants to do when they get to the Smokies, especially if a big party's coming in or it's a wedding party? They want to go out on that deck and have that great group shot. Well, when decks are compromised and you have significant loads of people on those decks, bad things can happen. Here in this picture, you see that the deck support has broken. Thankfully, the deck didn't fall and the whole party becomes sliding down the hill. A lot of these decks also are going to have hot tubs on them, and 400 to 500 gallons of water plus the weight of the hot tub and 4 or 5 people. That's a significant amount of weight being exerted upon these decks. While we're on this photo, let's look in the background. You can see a lot of things that we've been talking about. Steep slopes for one. High roof levels with canopies over them that you can't see how the decks are laid out. So, but this is what you want when you buy a cabin, right? In this same photo here, you can see that the deck has gave way. So imagine again, your family comes in at Christmas time. There's 20 of you out there taking that great Christmas photo, and then you feel the deck move. Pretty scary. Anytime that you walk around and you see that there's air gaps between the support posts and the flooring of the deck, that's not a good thing. That's not the intention, and there's very little load on this deck post. Very easy to see. You can see the exposed nails. The deck has moved. Crawlspaces. This could be an 1.5 hour video by itself, but we're not going to spend that much time on it. We're going to move through it. Lack of plastic on the ground. The vapor on the ground is controlled by a 4 to 6 mil polyplastic vapor barrier. It maintains most of the moisture on the ground. When that's not present, the liquid water in the soil evaporates, the vapor rises, Hopefully it will get out a vent if present. If not, the water only has two choices. One, it condenses as a water droplet onto the subfloor, and then it drips back to the ground to start the water cycle over. Or two, that water droplet absorbs into the subflooring, and the EPA says at 20% moisture, mold growth can occur. Are there molds present? Absolutely. These are passive crawl spaces where the outdoor air is moving in and out, and our forest floors are full of mold spores, so they get into the crawl space as well. But the key to controlling mold is to control the moisture. So if you don't have plastic on the ground under your cabin or any home, then more than likely you're going to have some type of fungal growth on the subflooring. Sometimes vents are present. They are closed. People close them in the winter to try to save their pipes from freezing. They forget to open them in the summer, so they're as good as not even being there. Sometimes vents are partially open, and this is a great study here. There's just enough air that's drawing out that causes the airflow to travel in this way. However, all the damp air can't get out, so you have mold growth only in the areas of the pathway of where the air is flowing through. Notice over here, there's no mold. There's nothing different on the ground. There's some plastic. There is some dampness coming in here, but the mold is only occurring where a vent is partially open. So there's a lot of chemistry, physics, biology that goes on in a home. It's fascinating. For instance, this white efflorescence on the block, that is a salt. As moisture travels through the block, it dissolves the salts and they go into solution. When the liquid water hits the surface, the water is evaporated, leaving these crystallized structures of calcium, sodium, magnesium, potassium. So this also is an indication that there is dampness traveling through the block. No vents at all. See this quite often in cabins, and I don't know why. And a subject that we're not even going to get into, that could only lead to possibly an increase in radon gas activity inside the home, especially with no vents. This particular one, there's no vents on the front, left, right, or back, and I believe the radon activity during the measurement was 18. So 4.5 times greater than what the EPA activity or threshold level of 4 picocuries per liter is established. We were at 18. Again, notice the slopes, notice the area, notice the tree cover. And once in a while we can have vents, but other people come along and during their activities can close them off. Speaking of slopes, this is actually a crawl space in a cabin built out over the mountain. Look how high this is. Look how steep this crawl is. There's no plastic there. We have water coming through the block, and they installed 2 vents on this side, one of which was open, the other closed. Now, once the vapor travels past this vent up into this area, it's very unlikely that it's going to decide to drop back down and then exit through the openings. So there should have been more vents 3 feet off of each corner and then scattered based on the square footage of the crawl space, and then those vents placed higher, or thermostatically controlled electronic crawl space vent fans could have been installed. Finally, let's talk about bank stability. Not really part of a home inspection, but it could cause major damage to your purchase. See that soil erosion again? That just occurs in the mountains. Notice the level of the air conditioner is off. So when they build these cabins in the Smokies, they have to bring equipment in and grade out a house seat. When they do that, they're worried about the flat area or the area that they can get their foundation down. Behind a lot of these cabins, a lot of the root balls, the trees, the soil is undermined, and this is all weak, and eventually it will fall. And where's it going to fall? Correct, timber, right toward your roof. This is a great example of how a lot of the cabins built on the mountainside or across the street side and not on the slope side of the Smokies are. They come in, they grade this out. You can see at one time this moss, this roots on these trees, this was all more level. And then when they dug this out, they uncovered the rock strata. And a lot of the rock strata over here during the upheaval of the Smoky Mountains, it's a lot of cobble and shale and just fragmented rocks that easily, when this gets rained upon, the soil washes away and these little rocks are constantly rolling down toward the home. So the cabins are built to where the banks are, the slope is toward the home. You can see all these little rocks here that are falling, and underneath these leaves, this was done last fall. This is nothing but rock in here. And you can't get heavy equipment in here to clean this out. This is physical labor, shovel and wheelbarrow type work. So keep that in mind. Look not only at that log cabin you're buying, but look around at the log cabin you're buying. So when we have the bank pointing toward the cabin, that means water is coming toward the cabin. And you can see here that the foundation, again, has moisture intrusion. Getting back to the bank stability or instability, this air conditioner, when it was placed, it wasn't subgrade, but all this material has fallen and it's wrapping itself around the evaporator fins, which is making the unit work harder. Here's a breaker box that's installed on the exterior, and at the time of installation, it was the appropriate height from the ground. But so much material had rolled down the side of the hill that I could even get the breaker box door covering open. So those were just 10 items. We could write a book. We could make videos that could go on for 8 hours, but I just wanted to share with you just a few things that as you decide to buy a cabin, some things you need to look at before calling us. You know what? We didn't even mention hidden dryer vents and fire hazards. We didn't mention bears getting into crawl spaces. We didn't mention foundation movements. We didn't mention the fact that there could be major cracks in the foundations. We didn't mention anything about gas plumbing and plumbing lines. We didn't talk about fireplaces, vented, non-vented gas logs. We didn't talk about old HVAC systems, gas furnaces, disconnected ductwork, fascia damages and wood rot in areas but where you can't see. We didn't talk about any plumbing issues, any appliance issues, bathtub showers, water leaks from the plumbing. And we didn't talk about water heaters and temperature pressure relief valves discharging into the crawl space. We didn't say anything about pressure tanks and wells and water quality and water safety. So that's just an example of what we do, and I hope you found this video very informative. Smoky Mountain Inspection Services would love to be a part of your team as you enter into this real estate transaction. Along with the home inspections, we also provide radon measurement and analysis. We do mold testing and consulting. I'm a certified residential thermographer and a licensed drone pilot. So we look forward to working with you, and please give us a call for any of your inspection needs.